It's Friday, and it's interesting because I talk to a lot of people over time, and I often forget who I talk to when about what, and then something will pop up or someone will tell me and say, "Hey, Steve, just caught a mention here of you in the news." And so, for instance, last week I talked for about an hour, I think, with a guy who has a podcast that's also broadcast on NPR. I might pop up on that. In fact, I'm pretty sure I will. So when that comes out, I will let you know. I also spoke to a syndicated newspaper columnist yesterday about something else entirely. And then last week, a good friend of mine named Neil Rubin called me. And Neil Rubin's a columnist for the Detroit Free Press, which is the paper I delivered as a young man. Now, here's the thing. I used to have the ritual where I would drive into work. I stopped at a gas station near my office, and I bought the paper. Come into my office, put the paper on the desk, and read the newspaper before I started my day. I did that every single day for years. And over time, it kind of fell apart because, among other things, the Free Press and the Detroit News, the two big Detroit dailies, were kind of going head-to-head against each other. And somewhere along the line, it looked like both papers couldn't make it. Then they kind of merged, did a joint operating agreement, all kinds of weird stuff. And, of course, daily newspapers also have kind of fallen by the wayside. But the Free Press and the News still publish editions, just not every single day. They also cost a little bit more than when I used to deliver them. I remember collecting, knocking on doors to get people to pay me. And at that time, it was about $5 a month. I believe it was $5.25 a month, something like that. A dollar and a quarter a week. So maybe a little bit more, maybe $6 a month, something like that. And so I went by, though, and bought the most recent Sunday Free Press. And I believe it cost me $4.99 for one paper. But, of course, inflation factors into that also. Because I'm talking about delivering the paper back in the 1970s. So, and I know a lot of people in my audience delivered newspapers. So that was a thing back then you did as a kid, get some spending money. But the reason I bought the paper is that Neil Rubin, who's a columnist for the Free Press, good friend of mine, brilliant columnist, very, very nice guy, has called me over the years on a couple different occasions and written columns about things that I could help him out with. And so he's the one who did the story about the lug nut case that was in the papers, meaning that I did some videos about the lug nut case, and then he wrote a column about it. And so the lug nut case, in case you don't know, is that in Michigan, there was a case where a woman brought her car into a dealership to have the tires rotated. They rotated the tires, but when they did that, they didn't tighten down the lugs all the way. And they admitted this. They said, yeah, we forgot to tighten the lug nuts on one side. And so driving away from the dealership, one of the wheels fell off and damaged the car and injured a passenger in the car. And the dealership admitted, yes, we didn't tighten those lug nuts down. And so a jury returned a verdict in favor of the customer and said, yeah, dealership, you're on the hook for that, under a law called the Motor Vehicle Service and Repair Act, which, among other things, says that you cannot charge somebody for work that's not performed. And the Michigan courts said, on appeal, performed is such a vague word. What does that really mean? They did take the tires off and rotate them, and they almost finished the job, so they performed it. And the weird part is that elsewhere in the act, it says that someone's got to sign off that the work was completed. And apparently, the plaintiff missed that when they took it up on appeal. And so the Court of Appeals said, no, the work was performed. And then when they brought that to the Michigan Supreme Court declined to hear the case, meaning that they're going to let that lower court case stand, despite the idiotic result. So as of right now, there's not an attorney on the face of this planet who understands the law who will take one of these cases. Because why would you? You're going to lose. Did they start the work? Yes. Boom, you're out. And so I've had to explain to a lot of people over the last few years that attorneys don't take these cases anymore. The law was essentially destroyed. It was gutted by the court actions there. So the law is on the books. It's MCL 257-1301 et sec, the Motor Vehicle Service and Repair Act. It's the law right before the Lemon Law. And it used to say that if you got somebody who was working on your car and they harmed you in a variety of different ways, they had to pay your attorney fees and court costs if you're forced to sue them to get redress. And you can't do that anymore. So Neil wrote a column about a story, And so it was kind of fun. I'm just telling you this right now. I heard it was in the paper on Sunday. And the Free Press online is behind a paywall. Much of it is. And I thought, well, I could pay to get behind the paywall. But wait, it's Sunday. I can go and buy a copy of the paper. So Sunday morning, I went to my neighborhood store, bought a copy of the paper, brought it back, put it on the table in front of me, and it was like taking me back in time. First of all, there's a smell to the paper that you recognize. Yes, that's that's the Free Press. Now, I suspect the Detroit News probably smells the same way. But, you got your whole thing here. You got some stuff about the Tigers. You got some car dealership ads and a Dunham's ad up there. They got a story here about the Oxford shooter getting life in prison. Pot sales are generating taxes for local municipalities. And that's always a fun thing, is seeing the variety of news that's out there. And I didn't know where his story was going to be, so I had to kind of flip through here. Mitch Albom's Say Detroit Radiothon raised $2 million. And, of course, he's a well-known Detroit figure and also author of the book Tuesdays with Morrie, among others. And let's see, a music teacher lands a record deal after an impressive performance. Brian McCollum, the longtime pop music critic. And then there we go, Neil Rubin, columnist on page 4. DoorDasher says Midas wrecked his car, so now he's learning the law. And the article begins on page 4, and it continues over, I believe, to page 9, if memory serves, as I like to say. And there we go, and there's a picture of the man wearing a Michigan shirt. Good for him. It tells about the story of the man from West Bloomfield and his 2010 Ford Escape. And Neil spoke to that man as well as the attorney for the repair shop. And so what's happening in the story, and the reason Neil called me, is he wanted to make sure that he got the story straight with the previous legal iterations. And we talked about that for a little bit. We got caught up. I hadn't talked to him about a year. And by the way, Neil is the one who also used to write the storylines for Gil Thorp, the cartoon. And if I can find it, I will put it on the screen, because I was talking to him one day, and I said, wait, that's right, you do the storylines for Gil Thorp, right? And he goes, yeah, so he wrote the storylines, someone else drew it, and that put it together. I said, so that means that you get to make up character names, right? Like minor characters? He goes, yes, because Gil Thorp is the story of, I believe, a high school coach, a sports coach. So in football season, it's all football stories. I said, so is there any chance you'd work me into a story? He goes, absolutely. So there's a story that is about a football game, and there's one frame where it talks about an opposing player named Steve Lehto. So Neil did that for me. So just for that alone, he's one of the greatest guys on the planet, okay? I will now live forever for one frame of Gil Thorp. And that, my friends, that's eternal fame right there. But getting back to this story is that this guy brought his car into a car repair place, and he says that they didn't do the work right, and that later on, something bad happened to his car, and he wanted them to make it better. And he says that they did not agree to do that for him. And as a result, he went after them in court. But he called around and couldn't find an attorney to take the case, because attorneys like me have all heard that these cases can't be won. And so that's the problem, is that if you take your car to an auto repair facility in Michigan and they're negligent in how they work on your car, you can sue them for negligence. You can. And all you got to do is prove that they had a duty to repair your car properly, and they didn't repair it properly, and you were harmed. Boom, negligence right there, okay? You go, Steve, why is that not a good case? Well, if you want to pay me hourly, my hourly rate to pursue that, if it goes to trial, which it might, we're talking thousands of dollars in attorney fees. And I'm not knocking the guy's vehicle here, but his vehicle isn't actually worth what my attorney fees would be by the time we got through the case. And you go, but Steve, what about a contingency? Okay, pay me 1/3 of what you recover, minus costs, of course. There's a filing fee and other fees that go along with the lawsuit. And by the way, when you file a lawsuit like this and they know that you're paying your own way, the other side, which I believe would probably have an insurance company paying their fees, will drag their feet to teach you a lesson. because they know that the longer they can drag the thing out, the more it's going to cost you and the less likely you are to want to proceed. And then you might say, but Steve, as a matter of principle. Well, the problem is that I can't afford to take on all these cases, and neither can most attorneys, that are brought to them where the people say, look, I'm really, really upset. As a matter of principle, can you handle this case? And it's like, well, if I took every case that's brought to me as a matter of principle, I couldn't actually earn a living. I'd be too busy doing those and not making enough money to, pay my overhead. So I feel really sorry for people who are situated like that now, but we knew this was going to happen. Now, here is the only bright spot in all of this, and it requires you to think optimistically. But someday down the road, something horrific is going to happen. Someone's going to take a car into a dealership or a repair facility. They're going to screw something up, and somebody's going to get hurt really, really badly. And someone's going to go, okay, the amount of money here is worth it. Let's file a claim under both negligence as well as the Motor Vehicle Service and Repair Act. And if things work out just right, you can take that up on appeal. And when you get on appeal in front of the Court of Appeals, you can point out that the previous court screwed up, presumably because the parties in front of them didn't brief it properly, and nobody pointed out that it was required that the work be completed as well as performed. But it would take you to go to the Court of Appeals at least, and the Court of Appeals is going to go, but the problem is when we ruled that way, the Supreme Court of Michigan appears to have agreed when they refused to take the case on appeal. And you got to say, yes, I need you to do whatever you're going to do because I'm going to need to take it up to them and ask them to revisit this. And so will the Michigan Supreme Court admit they screwed up? I doubt it. I'm not optimistic on these things. I've seen other things they've screwed up as well. It's sad in a way. A lot of people do ask me about, what it's like to be an attorney. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Those kinds of things. What I don't like about being an attorney is that I can stand here and look at the law and look at the real world and go, okay, there are people in the real world who can't be helped because although there's a law on the books that says they can be helped, the Michigan courts have said, well, that law doesn't read the way you think it does. So as long as they started the tire rotation, that tire rotation was performed. That's idiotic. And by the way, I believe the failure this man is complaining about in his case is a lot like the failure that was in the other case. In fact, it is so similar that a court is likely going to look at it and go, guess what? There's a case not only on point, but it's on point because it describes a similar failure by a similar type of mechanical situation. So I feel very sorry for the guy. We'll see what happens. But Neil wrote the story, but he didn't quote me. That's okay. But I had a lot of people contact me. Hey, Steve, I think you talked about this lug nut case before, didn't you? Check out Neil Rubin's column. So a lot of people sent it to me. Thank you very much. But I can't really help out on the situation because, unfortunately, I don't think that it's going to end well either way. But I admire his attempts. And I believe that Neil even referred to it as kind of a Don Quixote kind of thing to go up and do a battle that you may or may not win, but at least you admire the guy who's going to do the battle. But that gave me the opportunity to buy a Detroit Free Press for the first time in a couple of years. And it was actually a pretty cool experience. So there you go. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.